So recently, I participated in a book fair for Smashwords summer sale, and I moved every single book of mine except one, and that book is In the Shadow of the Six, right? Which was very concerning for me because why? Why don't you like my book? And it's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And it's such a good story. Is it the name change? Could be the name change. Just called Between Death and Heaven. Now it's called In the Shadow of the Sticks. I might take it back to Between Death and Heaven if that's the problem. So I decided that I'm going to read for you a chapter or two to get you started on this journey. And if you have thoughts on what I read, I would like to hear them. So please do send me a comment, feedback. You can be as nasty as you like. Just this once, mean comments are welcomed. Okay? So here we go. I'm not just, doing the whole spooky thing for fun. Kenya Power has taken my power. Okay, so chapter 1, Ghosts. Phil ran his hand down her naked flesh as she slept, watching her clear white skin in fascinated absorption. She was a big girl, his Amazon, from her fiery strawberry hair, inherited from Viking antecedents, long dead, to her piercing green eyes that made him shiver every time she glanced at him. Most days he couldn't believe she was his. His finger trailed down her endless legs, thick and shapely as saplings, ending in long toes, gaily painted yellow. She was asleep now, worn out from his passion and hers. A smile played around her rosebud lips, even as she dozed. Perhaps she could feel his gaze on her. Lillian, he whispered in her ear before he bit it playfully. Her smile widened, but she didn't open her eyes or say a word. Lil, me darling, he drawled, but again she ignored him. He leaned over her and placed a kiss behind her ear while he pressed his already erect member into her backside. Phil was a small guy, except where it really mattered. A shiver ran down her body as his lips touched her flesh, and Phil took it as encouragement. He promptly inveigled one of his legs between hers, widening the space between her legs as he slipped his long, slim fingers into her, kissing her neck all the while. She made a small sound of encouragement, but didn't open her eyes. That was all he needed, to position himself, to enter her from behind, all the while running his hands softly up and down the inside of her thighs, teasing her with sensation. She moaned sensuously, arching her back to give him more access, her eyes still closed. He thrust suddenly into her, unable to hold back any longer. His eyes widened as the brown of his irises narrowed into pinpoints of pleasure. His mouth opened in a soundless groan, as he thrust faster and faster into her. The encouraging noises she made, egging him on. It was over in minutes, but neither minded. It had been a long night of celebration. I don't feel well, Lillian. I don't feel well at all. Are you sure about the pork in that jambalaya? Phil asked as he came back from his third visit to the bathroom later in the morning. The jambalaya is fine. It's your bloody habit of not washing your hands. That is the fucking problem, Phil, Lillian replied irritably, though if asked, she'd have to admit that she wasn't feeling 100% either. Okay, cool your jets, Lil. I was just asking, Phil replied. Sorry, long night, Lillian replied contritely. Really? What were you up to? Phil said, instantly forgetting his discomfort as he jumped on the bed, facing her as she lay down. Lillian rolled her eyes and turned away from him. She loved Phil with all her heart, but he could be just a smidge more affectionate than she was used to. South London did not encourage loving behavior among its residents. Phil and Lillian had been enjoying a nice candlelit dinner the evening before to celebrate Lillian's attainment of citizenship in the United States. Phil could hardly understand her strong Cockney accent half the time, but his heart had been hers at first sight, and he hadn't looked back since. The narrow complication of already having a girlfriend hadn't stopped him from walking up to her with a fat bunch of daffodils the first time he saw her and asking her to marry him. She had laughed in his face, but he'd seen the interest in her eyes as they traveled over his 5'4" frame, small but well built. The Navajo blood that ran in his veins gifted him his dark hair and brown eyes, and his Spanish ancestry was responsible for the bronze of his skin, and probably his height as well. His mother's people were small, if proud Spaniards. Although he was an accountant by trade, he worked over at Evans Alligator Ranch and therefore indulged in some wrestling with extremely large reptiles. That accounted for his pleasantly muscled frame. When he told Sally that what they'd had been good, but it was over. Now she hadn't been pleased. But it didn't worry him. She would get over it. She had to because he wasn't going back to her, especially now that Lillian had agreed to stay. Phil's stomach suddenly went into cramp and he collapsed on the floor, squirming in pain. His stomach was churning like it was full of snakes, attempting to exit via the stomach wall instead of following the correct route down to his anus. It actually seemed to undulate. He waited in horror for long writhing figures to shoot from it in a burst of black slime and green goo, just like in the movies. Lillian leapt naked from the bed and attempted to straighten him out. Phil, what's the matter with you? She cried urgently. Should I call someone, a doctor or something? Speak to me. But Phil continued to thrash about on the ground. Lillian stood up and ran to the phone, dialing 999 instinctively before remembering she was in America now and dialing 911. Hello? Is this the emergency services? My boyfriend's in pain. You need to come quick, she shouted down the line, speaking as clearly as possible so they'd understand her. These Americans did not like foreigners. What is the nature of your emergency, ma'am? The voice asked on the line. This inquiry was too much for Lillian's agitated spirit. She banged the phone down in frustration, looking around desperately for inspiration. Then, shrugging her shoulders, she grabbed the nearest item of clothing, which happened to be her dress from last night. She leaned down and picked Phil up, slinging him over her shoulder in a fireman's lift and running out to the car with him. She grabbed her shoes as she passed at a run and the car keys. Lucky for them both that Phil was such a diminutive man compared to her frame, which was a strapping 5'8" and 230 pounds. Furthermore, she had been an amateur wrestler for many years before moving to the States to wrestle with alligators on the Evans Alligator Farm in Le Marais. She worked there as a keeper and could bench press twice her body weight. It was a match made in heaven. She drove hell for leather to the Le Marais clinic, the one run by the missionaries. Dr. Jonathan Ross was on duty, and he took one look at Phil and murmured, "Food poisoning," before moving on to the next patient. Lillian wanted to grab at him to make him stay, but he was already out the door. The nurse who came to do triage took Phil's temperature, then hurried out of the treatment room, looking worried. 2 minutes later, Dr. Ross was back, his face much graver than before. "What has this man eaten today?" he asked Lillian. For some reason, he was fading in and out of her vision, and she didn't know why. The room suddenly went black, and Lillian collapsed on the floor with a thunderous thud. She didn't writhe and moan with pain, but it was clear that whatever afflicted Phil had affected her too. They were both foaming at the mouth. Dr. Ross called for gastric lavage in a panic, feeling sorely inconvenienced by all this drama. He had a bottle of 64 Bordeaux waiting for him in his office. Phil was going into cardiac arrest. Dr. Ross shouted for the crash cart. He grabbed the defibrillator and prepared it for use. Just as he was about to administer the shock treatment to Phil's chest, the nurse attending to Lillian cried out in alarm. Lillian's heart was fibrillating too. Dr. Ross went into total panic and ran out of the room. "Fuck!" he screamed. "They're dead!" The nurses watched him go in shock. Then the head nurse, Nurse Carey, grabbed the paddles and rubbed them together. "Clear!" she shouted, and then administered the shock to Phil's chest. Nurse Eva went down on her knees and began to administer CPR on Lillian. There was a candy striper named Harpreet who had just started working at the hospital. She was from India, come to Le Marais for an 18-month exchange program. It was her first day, poor dear, and she was at a complete loss as to how to proceed. She looked towards the door and saw an old black woman peering into the room. She was tall and slim, with hair that was fully white and stood in an untidy halo around her head. She looked crazy, but her caramel eyes were calm and sane. "Is everything all right?" she asked in a deep, gravelly voice. "I'm sorry, what are you doing here?" Harpreet asked her uncertainly. "I heard a sound like a cry for help. I thought they were calling me, so I came," the woman said. "Why would they be calling you?" Harpreet asked, not even realizing that she knew automatically who they were. The old woman shrugged her shoulders, a wry look in her eye. "Well, I don't say me exactly, but I would expect they meant for anyone who could hear to come help," she said. "What is your name?" Harpreet asked her. "Mattia Andros, at your service." "What is yours, dear?" Mattia asked her. "Harpreet Singh. I am new," she said with a bob of her head. Well, Harpreet, I'm afraid it's much too late for either of us to help these two. Their spirits have been severed from their bodies. Bad Juju went on here. I can see. Well, I shall be leaving you now. My granddaughter awaits me, Mattia said. Wait! Harpreet shouted, not sure why she didn't want the old lady to leave. Peace, Harpreet. It will be all right, Mattia said, and with a small wave she was gone. It was like the sound came back on for Harpreet after that. The nurses were shouting, and Dr. Ross was screaming into the phone at the reception, calling for backup. On the floor and in the bed, the two corpses lay, the only peaceful and quiet beings about. That's end of chapter 1. Tomorrow, we shall do chapter 2. Will you tune in? Will you give me some feedback? Don't make me waste all this energy for nothing. Good night. Hi, so for today's chapter 1, we have electricity. And I'm just going to get right into it. Well, Harpreet wasn't quite right about that. Lillian and Phil were not peaceful at all. They were agitated and afraid. Being suddenly torn out from your body when you weren't expecting it was hell on the nerves. Phil, what's going on? Why can't I see our bodies over there, yet we're standing over here? Lillian asked tentatively. Probably because we're ghosts, judging from what that old lady just said. Weren't you listening? Phil asked, a tad irritably. No, I was probably too busy dying. But whatever. Now what? She asked, clinging onto his arm. Now we wait, I guess. I expect someone will be along soon to tell us where to go, Phil said with more certainty than he felt. But Lillian was clearly panicking, and so he would have to keep it together for the both of them. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, keeping tight hold of it and hoping no one was going to tear them from each other. Phil, do you think hell exists? Lillian asked, choosing this inopportune time to ask, speaking very clearly in her extreme fear. Because if there is, well, I don't know, Phil. I just might be going there. No one's going anywhere, Phil said, a bit louder than necessary. His voice echoed eerily, and the nurses faltered in their agitated conversation, as if they'd heard something. Phil and Lillian continued to stand, waiting to see if any doors would appear, or perhaps an angel or a white light at the end of the tunnel. But nothing whatsoever happened, and little by little, they began to relax. The morgue people came for their bodies, and Phil and Lillian debated whether or not they should accompany them. I think for now we probably should stay with them, Phil said uncertainly, and they followed the trolleys out of the room. The morgue was located conveniently next door to the clinic, and there was a corridor that linked both buildings. It made it very easy to transport bodies from one place to the other. The traffic rather tended to be one way, though, at least so far. As they followed the two men pushing the trolleys down the corridors, Phil and Lillian kept their hands tightly linked, eyes peeled for anything unusual. There was a man standing at the end of the corridor, outside the door that led to the morgue. The man who pushed the trolleys walked right past him as they pushed the bodies through the swinging doors. They ignored him and he them, and Phil and Lillian decided to do the same. When they drew abreast of him, though, he put out a hand to stop them. I'm sorry, this is as far as you can go, he told them. as he reached with his other hand to remove his Armani shades from his eyes. He was dressed in a black suit. It looked like Armani too, and a white shirt with a slim black tie. His black shoes were so shiny they'd be able to see their reflection in them if they had some. He was very tall, almost 7 feet, and his eyes were silver. His hair was a thick, wavy brown, and he had a jagged scar that dissected his face from the bottom of his right ear to the tip of his hairline on the left. It crossed his nose and passed between his eyes, narrowly missing the left. It looked to have been made by something extremely sharp. "Forgive me, but who are you?" Phil asked him. "My name is Jones. I'm the gatekeeper for this sector, and you cannot pass," Jones said. "Gatekeeper? Are you like the Grim Reaper or something?" Lillian asked in fascinated fear. Jones moved his lips in what they assumed he thought was a smile. It looked more like something a shark would do if sharks ever smiled. "The Grim Reaper? That is very funny." "No, I'm the gatekeeper, and you cannot pass," Jones said. "Right, we got that the first time," Lillian said, afraid she would get them in trouble with her big mouth. Phil squeezed her hand. It didn't work. "So who are you then, and why can't we pass?" she continued. "Your area of manifestation ends here. Your ectoplasmic shell cannot stretch outside these walls unless called by some powerful witch. You are trapped in here," Jones said. "So there's no better place? No heaven, no hell, no purgatory, no eternal rest? None of that?" Lillian persisted. "Oh, there is. Though if you are ready for any of those things, you'd have gone already. But you are still here," Jones said. "Very observant of you, Jones. Nothing gets by you. So tell us, how do we get ready for all that? And what the hell are you, anyway?" Lillian asked. "I am the gatekeeper," Jones began. "The gatekeeper," Lillian interrupted. Yeah, we got that. But what the hell is that?" she asked him slowly, like he was possibly retarded. "The gatekeepers are servants of time. We are sentries on the road to perdition or redemption. We turn back lost souls whose way is unknown to them. We cannot help you find your way. That you must do on your own." "But how can we find our way if we don't know where we're going?" Phil asked, startled into speech. Jones merely shrugged, putting on his shades, and turned his back on them, and stood en guard in front of the door to the morgue. Lillian and Phil looked at each other in trepidation, then shrugged and turned simultaneously back in the direction of the hospital. If they couldn't follow their bodies, then they'd just have to come up with another plan. "Did you check out his suit?" Lillian asked Phil. "That was Armani or I'm a hobbit." "I think the time for us to be concerned about labels on suits has passed, Lil, don't you?" Phil replied a little tiredly. All this being the brave one was wearing. "I just meant the bloke wearing Armani. The bloke's wearing Armani, and he's not human. So what does that tell us about how the afterlife works?" she replied. "I don't know. What does it tell us?" Phil asked, intrigued in spite of himself. "Well, I don't know, do I? But it tells us something. We just have to figure out what," she replied. There was a child standing at the hospital end of the corridor, leaning against the wall with his legs crossed. It looked like he was watching them come, which was a little scary for Phil. He didn't want to be the cause of anyone going crazy because of seeing a ghost, and certainly not a child. "You guys are new, right?" the kid said to them as they came up to him. "New? Lillian asked him, seemingly less bothered about this boy seeing them than Phil thought seemingly. Yeah, like newly dead, the boy replied. You see dead people? Phil asked uncertainly. The boy laughed out loud. His laugh seemed to echo off the walls in a way that made Phil's little heart shrink and his buttocks tighten in instinctive self-defense. I am dead, genius. Have been for a while actually. I got whacked by my stepdad. I don't think he meant to kill me. Just maybe shut me up, but here I am, he finished, spreading his arms out. I'm sorry, Phil said for lack of anything better. It's okay, I'm cool with it. Wish my mother would leave the deadbeat though. I think that's what's keeping me here. If she left him, I could go too, the boy said. How do you know that? Lillian asked him curiously. Oh dear, that's the end of the sample. So I guess that's as far as I can go for you guys. And I hope you are intrigued enough to continue on your own. And I am intrigued enough to continue on my own because it's been a long time since I read that book and I think I want to read it again. So anyway, thank you for staying with me this far. And, like I said, mean comments are welcomed. Whatever you want to say, feel free. I will not be offended. Or if it inspires you, I will be offended. I'll be terribly hurt. So knock yourselves out.